Bilkis Moola, poet based in Mpumalanga. Welcome to the discussion that we're going to have today about your latest anthology, Footsteps in the Shadows.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm fine. First of all, can you tell us how did the title Footsteps in the Shadows come about? Why the title Footsteps in the Shadows?
I was sitting on the stairs and I was thinking about something unique. I was looking at the shadows in the dark at night, and imagination tapered into my mind, and I thought about footsteps in shadows, the shadow, the visage of a shadow, and the obstruction of light. And thematically, that interested me.
So how different do you say the latest anthology, the third one, is different from the other two that you had before?
Well, the first one was Wounds and Wings, a lyrical self through metaphor, right? And that dealt with the process of catharsis after an abused marriage. Then the second one was Ebb and Flow of Love. So that looked at love and the magnanimity of the emotion and the way it features in everybody's life. Footsteps in Shadows encompasses many different themes. It ranges from heartache, melancholy, love, but what is most interesting about Footsteps in Shadows is that it is political. It explores refugees in crisis. It deals with holocausts in history. For example, there are holocausts that have not even been heard of, like the Bangladesh Holocaust, rape, weapons of destruction, rape as a weapon of war, and it's an enlightening collection of poetry about self-awareness, but also about consciousness and political consciousness as well as consciousness of the self.
Why do you think we've not heard so much about the other Holocaust that you touch on in the book?
I am not sure. The main Holocaust that we consider of when it comes to Holocaust is the one in Germany and the Holocaust of the Jews. I had never heard of the Bangladesh Holocaust, where something like 4 million people were killed. It was the second largest Holocaust to Auschwitz. I'm not sure Bangladesh, if we had to look at it in contemporary society, is a partition. So there was East and West Pakistan, and one of them became Bangladesh. Indira Gandhi was responsible for that partition. And so it's all about separation, it's all about superiority, inferiority, class divisions, and massacres that grow beyond human comprehension.
This book is dedicated to Dr. Kasim Moola, and you mentioned something in the poem about, I think it's an exclamation you made, that we have a poet in the family.
My uncle was exceptionally accomplished. For him, unless you were at the highest level of education, you were not educated. So he always encouraged education, and that made him proud. He defined all of his nieces and nephews by their levels of education. And with me, he encouraged me towards a professorship in English literature, and I began writing quietly, and when I finally completed it, he sent me an email. He lived in Canada, and he passed away 2 years ago. tragically. So I dedicated this book to him because he sent me an email with pride. There's a poet in the family. So it suggested that in my family, my niece is a poet, my other niece is an optometrist, my nephew is a businessman, my other nephew has an MBA, so your education levels were completely important to my uncle. You had to succeed in some way or else you were wasting your life. He discouraged it tremendously, which is what I find most memorable about him, and which is why he is missed, and this is why I dedicated this book especially to him.
Can you please read us the poem that you dedicated to him?
Right. The title of the poem is Adieu. Poet in the family, you said, with pride. Tears pour from my heart for an uncle distinguished and admirable, loved by all who you motivated and encouraged with your gentle words and love for nieces and nephews, sons, and a wife who is the rose in our family. Tears flow like streams down my cheeks for a longing to see you just one more time. In your absence, I shall heed your praise and banter, loving memories of one who viewed you as an icon. You will be missed with love, and when the stars gaze upon us, you will be among them with a glitter as the star that shone in life.
Your book is quite interesting, and it has got 10 themes. And there are themes that stood out for me. Amongst those themes was where you were taking the issue of immigration. I'll talk about immigration for people moving from one country to the other, running away from refugees, not immigration. And under the theme, you had a poem about Alan Keddy. For those who don't know, who was Alan Keddy?
He was a little boy, 3 years old, and his family were trying to flee Syria. And he drowned. And when his body was washed ashore, a photographer caught his body on camera, lifeless body. This photograph launched the awareness of refugees, the slaughter of innocents, of a little boy who was trying to escape with his family and is now being commemorated. The world could not be silent anymore. So this little boy would have been a young boy by now, but a mural was made of him in Frankfurt, I think. And then there was a coin of Alan Kurdi in one of the Scandinavian countries. I have it in my poem. But he was also Lupe Fiasco to raise awareness. So I've written the poem, but to raise awareness of the plight of refugees, we look at the innocence of this child and the innocence of a child who is a victim of war, of genocide, and it tugs at the heart. Anyone who is not caught in emotions of serious despair at the state of the world after looking at this photograph cannot be touched.
Do you think we learn something though as a humanity? Do we learn something from these disasters? For example, there's a poem that you call Boat People, and I'm old enough to remember the boat people of reading about it. The Vietnamese during the Vietnam War, there were boat people. Old enough to remember the boat people of Cuba in the 1980s. Now we have a whole generation of boat people with more weaker boats made up of plastic and made up of other things. Do you think as you may need to learn that 10, 15 years from now, this story is not going to repeat itself?
Historically, history repeats himself. That's a common. History repeats itself, and there's a cycle throughout human civilization, throughout the evolution of human society for resources, a fight for resources that defines primarily the lunge for, or the greed that captures the slaughter of innocent people. And I don't think it will end in 20 or 50 years, not even 50 years. Because as society transforms, so does the need for different resources arrive. So nomadic society looked for water and shelter and food. Now it's a need for oil. So they're targeting countries like Iraq for oil. Perhaps we live in the fourth industrial revolution. So what would it be 10 years from now? Chips, microchips? Digital media. There's this constant drive towards competition and acquisition and power.
So what role do you think poets can play to arrest that degradation that's actually happening?
Precisely what I have done. I have created sympathy and awareness, because if you ask the common person, have you heard of Alan Kurdi? And who was that? Or have you heard of the boat people? Who are they? Have you heard of the Yemenis crisis? Did you hear that Bangladesh had a war? And why is it that certain genocides or conflicts are granted so much of attention and publicity when some are ignored or neglected? Like, everybody knows about the Holocaust, Auschwitz. There are books written about it. There are movies made on it. Yet, Bangladesh, I personally had not heard of it. It was my publisher who told me about it, and then I did reading and was horrified. That section or those themes had me utterly depressed. I had to stop writing.
So you said earlier on that this third collection, Footsteps and Shadows, is more on the human rights. You actually came out to champion human rights, to pick on issues.
Yes.
How did the process to select which issues to champion come about? How did you go about it?
I write in the middle of the night, when my imagination is at its most fertile. That which affects me or inspires me occurs in the wee hours of the night. How did I select the themes? I'm not really sure. I just thought about them, like I did with my previous book, Afghan Girl. It captivated massive audiences throughout the world. So this time it follows a sequence. There's Alan Kurdi. Perhaps if I write another collection of poetry, I'd look at another famous photograph and have it sketched and discuss it, or the consciousness or the savagery inherent in humanity. Footsteps in shadows. Shadows is the blocking of light, is a reflection of darkness. So the darkness inherent in human society and the human spirit is portrayed through this book and the poems.
You mentioned pictures shaping how you sometimes pick your themes. The Afghan girl, Alan Kurdi, and down history we have, as a humanity, been able to remember moments that are captured in pictures. The Sudanese girl who was on the way to a feeding center, and a vulture that was waiting for the girl to collapse so it can get its own meal. And those are pictures that remember events by the helicopter at the US Embassy in Saigon when Vietnam fell. Why do you think as human beings we tend to remember more those moments that does not show our excellence, that actually show how low we can be as human beings? Why is it that those are memories that always continue to rise within us, that we remember epochs based on the badness of that time and not the good that came out of that time?
Because there is not much good. There is not much good. If you look at contemporary politics, what, in your opinion, is good? The darkness, the human spirit has a dark face. But for those of us who are affected by these photographs, we would like to raise awareness of these issues so that there could be a change, a shift in behavior, a shift in revenge, a shift towards peace. Yet, there's the diabolical part of humanity, the wickedness, the incomprehensibility of what human beings are capable of when they kill and butcher other people. And that for me was perhaps what affected me or informed me while I was searching for my themes.
I noticed there's a poem in your book that's dedicated to Janine Pickett.
Janine Pickett.
Janine Pickett. Who's Janine Pickett?
Janine Pickett is the editor of Indiana Voice Journal. I could not publish her here because the artist that sketched her was not to be found. So we could not copyright his sketch. But she lives in Indiana, and she is a beautiful woman. She publishes poetry. Indiana Voice Journal. So I wrote a poem in dedication to her. She is alive. She has her portrait that was portrayed by an excellent artist called Shamir van Schalkwyk, who we cannot find, but he is absolutely talented. In what we did is through Shamir's artwork, this was on Facebook and I posted it, there is Nanda Subin who runs an art school, and he offered Shamir a bursary. Now Shamir resides in the Cape Flats and would not afford to go to university to study, but his artistry is quick. And Nanda Subin, who is an acclaimed and accomplished political cartoonist, as well as an artist and an activist who went into exile during apartheid, first to Brazil and then to New York, and then after democracy he returned to South Africa. So with him I dedicated a poem because his artwork is exceptional. So Shamir did a portrait of him, but we could not use that one because we can't find Shamir. And so I asked Nanda to do a portrait of himself. So he did that. And his portrait is there, and that poem took me 2 weeks to write. It was the most difficult poem that I had written because it had to capture the essence of a political cartoonist, an artist, a revolutionary, an educator, so many dimensions to a man who came from humble background in Durban, an Indian man who opposed apartheid, and he returned, and each stanza is the color of the rainbow. So
that's beautiful. Thank you very much. It's a very, very beautiful book, Footsteps and Shadows, and I wish you all the best in your writing. Good enough, Michelle, in conversation with Bilkis Moola.
Thank you.